Have you ever walked into a room and immediately felt that something was wrong, even though nobody had said a single word? Have you ever replayed one conversation over and over again, long after everyone else had already forgotten it? Or found yourself completely exhausted, not because your body was tired, but because your mind had been carrying emotions that didn't even belong to you? If so, there's a chance you've spent your entire life believing something was wrong with you. Maybe people called you too sensitive, too emotional, too intense. Maybe they told you to stop overthinking, to toughen up, to stop taking everything so personally. And after hearing those words enough times, you started believing them. You began hiding your emotions, questioning your instincts, pretending that things didn't hurt, even when they did. But what if everything you've been told about your sensitivity is wrong? What if feeling deeply isn't a weakness, but a psychological trait that very few people truly understand? Carl Jung believed that some people experience life differently, not because they're fragile, not because they're broken, but because their inner world is extraordinarily alive. They don't simply observe life, they absorb it. They notice the subtle change in someone's voice, the sadness hidden behind a smile, the tension no one else seems to recognize. They carry conversations for days, feel the weight of other people's pain, and often mistake that burden for their own. The tragedy is that the world rarely teaches these people how to protect themselves. Instead, it teaches them to become less of who they are, to feel less, to care less, to hide the very gift that makes them unique. But what if your greatest source of exhaustion is also the greatest source of your strength? In this video, we're going to explore why some people feel everything so deeply, why it leaves them emotionally drained, and why Carl Jung believed this sensitivity is not something to eliminate, but something to understand. Because by the end of this journey, you may discover that the part of yourself you've spent years trying to silence was never your greatest weakness. It may have been your greatest gift all along. Most people assume that feeling deeply is simply part of your personality, that you were born this way. And while there is some truth to that, Carl Jung believed the story goes much deeper. Because sensitivity is not only about what you feel, it's about what you learned to notice. Think back to childhood. Some children grow up in environments where emotions are clear and predictable. They know when they're safe, they know when they're loved, they know where they stand. But other children grow up in a very different world, a world where moods change without warning, where tension fills a room before anyone speaks, where love feels uncertain, where they learn that paying attention isn't optional, it's survival. These children become observers. They learn to read faces, body language, tone of voice. Silence, they become experts at detecting emotional shifts long before they understand what those shifts mean. Without realizing it, their nervous system is being trained, not for comfort, but for vigilance. Years later, that same child becomes an adult who instantly notices when something feels off, an adult who can sense discomfort before anyone says a word, an adult who absorbs the emotional atmosphere of every room they enter. And because this process happens automatically, they often don't realize that other people aren't experiencing the world the same way. What feels obvious to them is invisible to most. This is why highly sensitive people often feel misunderstood. They assume everyone sees what they see, feels what they feel, notices what they notice. But most people don't. Carl Jung observed that individuals with a rich inner life tend to process reality through multiple layers at once. They don't just hear words, they hear intention. They don't just see actions, they see patterns. They don't just experience emotions, they experience the meaning behind those emotions. And while this depth of perception can be extraordinary, it comes with a price. Because the more deeply you experience life, the more energy it takes to carry it. The world praises people for being productive, for being strong, for moving quickly. But it rarely teaches people how to live with depth, and so many sensitive people spend years fighting themselves, trying to become less aware, less emotional, less affected, not realizing that the problem was never their sensitivity. The problem was that nobody ever taught them how to understand it. And until you understand the source of your sensitivity, you'll continue treating your greatest gift as if it were a flaw. If feeling deeply is such a gift, why does it hurt so much? Why do people who care the most often end up carrying the heaviest emotional burden? Carl Jung believed the answer isn't found in the emotions themselves, but in what happens when those emotions are never understood. Most people think emotional exhaustion comes from doing too much, working too hard, sleeping too little, having too many responsibilities. But for deeply sensitive people, the greatest source of exhaustion is often invisible. It's the constant effort of processing everything, every conversation, every facial expression, every subtle shift in someone's mood, every disappointment, every unspoken tension. While others move on, you keep reflecting. You replay the moment. You wonder what you missed, what you could have done differently, what the other person really meant. Your mind isn't searching for problems, it's searching for meaning. Jung believed that people with a deep inner world are naturally drawn to what lies beneath the surface. They don't stop at appearances. They instinctively ask, why? Why did that person suddenly become distant? Why did those words hurt so much? Why do I keep feeling something I can't explain? This constant search for meaning can become emotionally overwhelming, not because you're weak, but because your mind rarely rests. Even in silence, it continues observing, connecting, interpreting, trying to make sense of everything. And there's another burden most sensitive people never notice. They don't only carry their own emotions, they often carry everyone else's. A friend's sadness, a partner's anxiety, a stranger's pain. The atmosphere of a room. Without realizing it, their emotional boundaries begin to disappear. They confuse empathy with responsibility. They believe that if they can feel someone else's suffering, they must also solve it. But no human being can carry the emotional weight of the entire world. Eventually, the nervous system begins to collapse under a burden it was never meant to hold. This is why so many deeply sensitive people feel exhausted, even after doing almost nothing. Because they haven't been resting. They've been carrying. And perhaps the hardest part is that nobody else can see the weight. From the outside, you look calm, quiet, functional, but inside, your mind has been fighting battles that no one even knows exist. Carl Jung believed that awareness without understanding becomes suffering. The more conscious you become, the more important it is to learn what truly belongs to you and what never did. Because the moment you stop carrying emotions that were never yours, you don't become less compassionate. You finally become free. For most of your life, you've probably been told what your sensitivity costs you, how easily you get hurt, how much you overthink, how emotionally drained you become, but almost no one talks about what your sensitivity gives you. Carl Jung believed that every psychological trait carries both a burden and a hidden gift. The problem is, most people spend their lives trying to eliminate the burden without ever discovering the gift. People who feel deeply often notice what everyone else overlooks. They sense when someone is pretending to be okay. They recognize fear behind anger, loneliness behind confidence, pain behind silence. While others judge behavior, you instinctively search for its cause. This ability isn't ordinary. It's a different way of seeing the world. Jung believed that true psychological insight begins where surface appearances end. And people who feel deeply rarely stay on the surface. They are naturally drawn toward truth, toward meaning, toward authenticity. This is why so many of them become the person others trust with their deepest secrets. Not because they always have the perfect advice, but because they know what it feels like to carry invisible pain. They don't listen just to answer. They listen to understand. They don't make people feel analyzed. They make people feel seen. And in a world where most people are desperate to be understood, that is an extraordinary gift. The tragedy is that many deeply sensitive people spend years wishing they were different. They admire those who seem emotionally untouched, those who move on quickly, those who never appear affected. Without realizing that emotional numbness is not the same as emotional strength. Real strength is not feeling less. Real strength is learning how to carry your depth without letting it consume you. Carl Jung believed that the qualities we reject in ourselves often become the very qualities capable of transforming our lives. Perhaps your sensitivity was never meant to be erased. Perhaps it was meant to be guided, protected, and understood. Because the moment you stop seeing your depth as a weakness, you stop fighting yourself. And when that battle finally ends, the energy you've spent trying to become someone else can finally be used to become who you truly are. If you've spent your entire life feeling everything more deeply than everyone else, you may believe there's only one solution. Become less sensitive. Build thicker skin. Care less. Feel less. But Carl Jung believed that healing never comes from rejecting who you are. It comes from understanding who you are. The goal is not to stop feeling deeply. The goal is to stop carrying what was never yours. Many deeply sensitive people confuse empathy with responsibility. If someone is hurting, they feel they must fix it. If someone is angry, they believe they caused it. If someone is distant, they immediately begin searching for what they did wrong. Without realizing it, they become emotional caretakers for everyone around them. And little by little, they disappear. Jung warned that whenever we abandon ourselves to preserve someone else's emotional world, we move farther away from our own self. Because every time you ignore your own needs to rescue someone else's, you teach yourself one dangerous lesson: that everyone else's pain matters more than your own. Over time, that belief becomes an identity. You become the listener, the helper, the one everyone depends on. But when you're the one falling apart, you don't know who to call, because you've spent so long taking care of everyone else that you've forgotten how to take care of yourself. This is where true transformation begins, not by closing your heart, but by creating healthy boundaries around it. Imagine your sensitivity as a candle. A candle can bring warmth, comfort, and light to those around it. But if everyone keeps taking from its flame without protecting it, eventually the candle burns itself out. Your sensitivity works the same way. It was never meant to illuminate the entire world. It was meant to illuminate your path and the lives of those who genuinely value your light. Carl Jung believed that becoming whole requires one difficult decision: to stop sacrificing your authentic self just to make everyone else comfortable, because compassion without boundaries becomes self-destruction. But compassion guided by wisdom becomes one of the greatest strengths a human being can possess. Perhaps your exhaustion has never been proof that you're too sensitive. Perhaps it's proof that you've been carrying burdens your soul was never meant to hold. What if everything you've spent your life trying to change was never the real problem? What if your sensitivity, your depth, your ability to feel what others ignore, was never a flaw that needed fixing? Carl Jung believed that the greatest tragedy isn't having a gift. It's spending your entire life believing that gift is a curse. Think about it. The people who create the most meaningful art often feel deeply. The people who truly understand others often feel deeply. The people who notice suffering before anyone else often feel deeply. The people who change lives often feel deeply. Their strength doesn't come from feeling less. It comes from learning how to live with what they feel. Perhaps you've spent years wishing you could become someone who doesn't care so much, someone who moves on quickly, someone who never overthinks, someone who never carries the weight of another person's pain. But if that happened, you wouldn't just lose your pain. You would lose your compassion, your intuition, your ability to see beauty where others see nothing, your capacity to love with extraordinary depth. You would lose the very qualities that make you. Jung believed that wholeness is not achieved by removing parts of yourself. It is achieved by accepting them, understanding them, learning how to guide them instead of fearing them. Your sensitivity doesn't need to disappear. It needs direction. It needs boundaries. It needs wisdom. Because once your heart learns the difference between empathy and responsibility, between compassion and self-sacrifice, between understanding others and abandoning yourself, everything begins to change. You stop apologizing for who you are. You stop seeing your emotions as enemies. You stop believing that you have to become colder to survive. And for the first time, you realize something extraordinary. The world doesn't need fewer people who feel deeply. It needs more people who know how to protect that gift. So, perhaps, your journey was never about becoming stronger by feeling less. Perhaps true strength has always been the courage to feel deeply, without allowing the weight of the world to extinguish your light, because the people who feel the deepest often become the ones who illuminate the darkest places. And maybe that is exactly who you were always meant to be. Before you leave, if this video made you feel understood, if it gave a name to something you've carried in silence for years, then I want to invite you to become part of the inner shadow. Subscribe if you're ready to explore the hidden parts of yourself through the timeless wisdom of Carl Jung and deep psychology. Every week, we uncover the unconscious patterns that shape our lives, not to judge them, but to understand them. If this message resonated with you, please leave a like. It may seem like a small action, but it helps this video reach someone who has spent their entire life believing they're simply too sensitive. And if there's one person who immediately came to your mind while watching this, someone who feels everything deeply, someone who's always carrying the emotions of everyone else, share this video with them. It might be the first time they realize there was never anything wrong with them. Final reflection before you go. Take a moment to think about one question. What if your greatest struggle has never been your sensitivity, but the fact that you spent your entire life fighting against it? Perhaps you've been trying to become someone who feels less, when your soul has only been asking you to learn how to carry your feelings with wisdom. Carl Jung believed that every person is born with gifts the world doesn't always understand, and because they're misunderstood, many people spend years hiding them. Not because they aren't beautiful, but because they were never taught how to protect them. Maybe your sensitivity was never meant to make you weaker. Maybe it was meant to help you see what others cannot, to understand what others overlook, to bring compassion into places where indifference has become normal. The world will always tell you to harden your heart. But perhaps your real challenge is learning how to keep your heart open without letting the world break it. So don't ask yourself how to become someone who feels less. ask yourself something far more important. How can I honor this gift without letting it consume me? Because the people who feel the deepest often become the people who heal the deepest. And perhaps that has been your purpose all along. Until our next journey, take care of your mind, protect your peace, honor your depth. And never forget, feeling deeply was never your weakness. It has always been one of your greatest strengths.